In 1984, they sent a staggering number of missions to this hostile planet. Missions that, for the most part, failed in catastrophic fashion. But with every failure came more determination, more ambition. Venus is the brightest object in our night sky. Shrouded in thick clouds, it's a hellish world that burns at temperatures high enough to melt lead. Its atmosphere is a swirling storm of sulfuric acid with crushing pressure that would destroy most life as we know it. And yet the Soviets seemed determined to get a closer look. The United States was busy focusing on the Moon and Mars, but the Soviet Union set its sights on something far more unimaginable and far-fetched. And to those who found out about the highly secret space program, it was deemed mission impossible. So why would anyone choose Venus as a world to explore? What drove them to spend so much time, energy, and resources on a fiery world that seemed so utterly inhospitable to human life? This officially began in the early 1960s with the launch of the Venera program, a series of space probes designed to explore the planet. The first of these, Venera-1, was launched on February 12, 1961. This was only 4 years after the Soviets had shocked the entire world by successfully launching Sputnik, the world's first artificial satellite. The space race was in full swing, and Venus, as Earth's closest planetary neighbor, seemed like a natural target for exploration by the Soviets. However, the first attempt didn't go well. Venera-1 lost contact with Earth 7 days after launch and drifted helplessly through the void of space, its signal gone forever. The spacecraft systems had failed, a reminder of just how difficult interplanetary travel really was. But the Soviet Union was undeterred by this failure. They quickly followed up with Venera-2 on November 12, 1965. This probe also failed to return any data. Venera-3 was launched just 4 days after Venera-2 and was designed to reach the surface of Venus. It did manage to crash land on the planet, becoming the first human-made object to impact another planet. But once again, contact was lost before any useful data could be transmitted back to Earth. Though not technically a success, this marked a significant milestone. Humanity had physically reached another planet. By the late 1960s, the Soviets were refining their designs and improving their understanding of Venus. They knew they were on the verge of something monumental, and for them, it was just the beginning. However, it seemed that Venus was a world that would remain unexplored. Every spacecraft the Soviets sent towards the planet was destroyed by either the extreme heat, the crushing atmospheric pressure, or mechanical failure. But instead of being discouraged, these failures only fueled the Soviet obsession with Venus. They would not give up. On June 12, 1967, the Soviet Union launched Venera-4, a mission that would change everything. Venera-4 was not just designed to fly by Venus, it was designed to enter its atmosphere. And this time, the mission would succeed. On October 18, 1967, Venera-4 entered Venus's atmosphere and began transmitting data back to Earth. For the first time in history, humanity was receiving information directly from another planet's atmosphere. The data revealed a world far more hostile than anyone had imagined. Venus's atmosphere was 90 times denser than Earth's, with surface temperatures reaching over 900 degrees Fahrenheit. The planet's air was almost entirely composed of carbon dioxide, with traces of nitrogen and toxic sulfuric acid clouds. Venera-4 managed to transmit data for 93 minutes as it descended before being crushed by Venus's intense pressure. Though the spacecraft didn't survive, it had accomplished its mission, providing scientists with their first real glimpse into the harsh realities of Venus. With each mission, the Soviets refined their technology. They learned from their failures, each probe getting closer to the surface. Each mission surviving just a little longer. By the early 1970s, the Soviets were ready to go even further. In 1970, they launched Venera-7, the first spacecraft specifically designed to land on Venus and transmit data from the surface. The engineers behind Venera-7 knew that the atmosphere of Venus was too dense for a parachute to slow the descent properly, so instead they built the probe to withstand a hard landing. On December 15, 1970, Venera-7 became the first human-made object to successfully land on another planet and transmit data back to Earth. It wasn't an easy landing. Venera-7 hit the surface at a far higher speed than intended. The probe fell after landing. Its antennas were now misaligned. For 23 minutes, it transmitted weak but valuable data back to Earth, confirming both the searing surface temperature and a crushing atmospheric pressure far greater than Earth's. Venera-7's mission was brief, but it was a triumph. It marked the first time humanity had successfully landed a spacecraft on another planet. But even though the Soviets had finally touched down on Venus, they weren't done yet. In 1972, the Soviets launched Venera-8, another landing mission. This time the probe transmitted data for over 50 minutes from the surface of Venus, revealing more about the planet's atmosphere and surface conditions. But what the Soviets truly craved was something far more tantalizing. They wanted to see Venus. Photographing Venus is no simple task. The planet is covered in a dense layer of toxic sulfuric acid clouds, which stretches about 12 miles thick. This cloud layer sits approximately 30 to 37 miles above the planet's surface. Surrounding the clouds is an even larger haze layer that extends from as low as 20 miles to as high as 56 miles. Even though they understood this, in 1975 they launched Venera-9 and Venera-10, twin spacecraft that would go down in history as the first to capture images from the surface of another planet. These probes were equipped with cameras, and despite the hostile environment, they succeeded in their mission. For the first time, humanity had a glimpse of what Venus really looked like. These images were haunting. Venus's surface was covered in sharp heat. Venera-9 transmitted data for 53 minutes before succumbing to the heat and pressure. Venera-10 lasted 65 minutes. In those brief moments, they sent back not only images but detailed measurements of the planet's atmosphere and surface. But even these successes weren't enough. The Soviets were still determined to push even further. It really was an obsession. The pinnacle of the Soviet Venera program came in 1982 with the launch of Venera-13 and Venera-14. These probes were the most advanced Venus landers ever built. They were designed to withstand the planet's extreme conditions for as long as possible, and they did not disappoint. On March 1, 1982, Venera-13 landed on Venus and began transmitting data. It survived for an astonishing 127 minutes. Over 2 hours in conditions that would melt most materials. Venera-14 landed 4 days later, and it also transmitted data for nearly an hour. Venera-13 and 14 sent back stunning panoramic images of the surface, showing jagged rocks, a sky that glowed with an otherworldly light, and a landscape that was as lifeless as it was fascinating. The colors were eerie, orange and red hues dominated the scene, distorted by the thick atmosphere. But the missions didn't just capture images. Venera-13 also recorded the sound of Venus. For the first time in human history, we had captured the sound of an alien world. What did it sound like? A haunting, low-frequency rumble. The sound of Venus's winds sweeping across the barren plains, the atmosphere so dense that even sound moved differently there. Venera-13 didn't just transmit sound and pictures, it also sent back crucial data about Venus's chemical composition. The probe analyzed the soil, confirming that the surface was mostly composed of basalt-like rock, and measured the levels of various elements and thorium. This gave scientists vital clues about the geological history of Venus, suggesting it had volcanic activity in its past. Venera-14, landing just days later, provided similar data and an equally haunting glimpse into this inhospitable world. Together, these missions represented the culmination of over 2 decades of Soviet space exploration focused on Venus. But the Soviet obsession with Venus didn't even stop there. The Venera program continued with later missions, including Vega 1 and Vega 2, which launched in 1984. These missions took the Venus exploration one step further by deploying both a lander and a balloon into the planet's atmosphere. Yes, you heard that right, a balloon. These balloons were designed to float in Venus's upper atmosphere, far above the scorching surface. The idea was to study the chemical composition of the clouds and the wind patterns. The balloons floated for days, sending back valuable data that further expanded our understanding of Venus's complex and turbulent atmosphere. For a brief time, the Soviet Union had reached a point where it wasn't just landing on Venus, it was exploring its skies, flying through the thick clouds of sulfuric acid, a feat that seemed unimaginable when the first Venera missions had failed so spectacularly. The Soviet Union's exploration of Venus came to an end. The collapse of the Soviet Union and the decline of its space program meant that no further missions were launched. Venus, the planet that had so captivated the Soviets for decades, was left to its own devices, shrouded in mystery once again.